No, Andy. I'm not an addict. Cell isn't a drug. It's a hyperdata patch. And right now, you're taking all of the information I need to complete my mission. Mission? What mission? What are you talking about? Andy was slowly drawing closer to true lucidity. The longer he lay there, the more he spoke. Never you mind, Andy. Just trust me. It's important.
Reese burst around the corner, only to find the cell-stinking corridor empty, as he had the previous 4. But the smell was stronger now. He had already eliminated a large number of docking ports from his search. Jail was trying to escape with his merchandise, and something had to be done about that. Grimly, Reese paced through another corridor, this one bathed in a dull red light. He was reaching the end of the port bays in this section. Jail had to be close. Had to be. There was simply nowhere else he could go. Slowly he approached another docking port, the stench of cells seeming particularly thick the closer he got. The hatchway was open, and he could hear voices inside. One labored and spoken through stolen gulps of air. The other strong and commanding, reassuring in its own way. Dropping his pace, Reese drew up alongside the hatch. The cell was tangible now, sticking in Reese's nostrils and assaulting his taste buds, making him want to retch. Reese could barely stand it where he was, could not imagine how Jail was still conscious, let alone able to nurse his patient. Still, it mattered little to Reese. He wanted his merchandise back. Addicts would pay through the nose for Cell. They didn't need to know what it was. Triple dose was as good a name as any, Reese supposed, and they'd pay for it, regardless of what it actually did to the user. They always woke up with such massive gaps in their memory that they tended to assume the drug had given them the best night of their lives. Everyone was happy. For a while, at least. Reese raised his pistol, pulled back the arming mechanism, and waited for a moment to allow his heart rate to settle. A small smile spread across his narrow features, and his eyes drew to well-focused slits. He prepared himself, and allowed his smile to widen. 1, 2, 3. Finally, after several seconds of labored work, Jail stopped tampering with the cartridge unit in Andy's arm. Resignedly, he reached into an inside pocket on his jacket and pulled out the long pen-shaped machine he had knocked Reese unconscious with. As soon as his fingers wrapped themselves into the correct position, the end of the tube began to glow red, casting light throughout the ship that spilled into the corridor outside. He held the device steadily over Andy's cartridge unit and hesitated. Using this device could damage the cell, could kill Andy, though that thought was not particularly important to Jail. Again, he hesitated, watching as a fine yellow liquid poured from the unit. Andy was mumbling, falling in and out of consciousness. Jail was not unsympathetic. He knew what it was like to take Cell for the first time. It had taken him a long time to develop his current resistance to the data transfer technique. But even after all of this time, he could not imagine what Andy must be seeing. No two cell transfers were alike, and this one was different than any that had gone before. If that cartridge was not removed from Andy, the things this data miner would know, the things he could do. Jail ignored the thought. Andy was starting to spasm. Moving the glowing tube closer to Andy's arm, Jail waited. Very quietly, deep in Andy's arm, the cartridge unit began to work. Gears and mechanical parts were starting up and grinding. The case was starting to open. The top of the unit paused briefly, caught on some of the hardened yellow pus that was coating Andy's right arm. Gently, Jail broke the layer of hardened discharge, and the unit ejected suddenly, sending the cell cartridge to the ground. Andy's body lurched violently as he took a deep gulp of air, his hands flailing wildly for a moment before finally coming to rest. Jail waited a moment before moving, watching Andy take a few labored gulps of breath, his eyes flickering open. After several seconds, Andy focused upon Jail, and recognition flooded his face.
I know what was in the cell.
Reese took a single last deep breath, filling his lungs. He waited until he could hold no more air. Instantaneously, he pivoted around the side of the airlock into Jail's ship, his pistol leveled before him. As he rounded upon the open airlock, Reese quickly swept the scene before him, taking in as many details as he could in the fraction of a second he had available to him. Andy lying half-conscious upon the floor, shouting deliriously at the top of his voice. Jail crouched over him, his collar still turned up around his neck, his attention focused solely upon Andy, and the cell cartridge lying in a pool of yellow pus upon the floor. Uncontrollably, Reese's eyes were drawn to the cell cartridge, unconsciously checking it to ensure all of the telltale markings that set it aside from an ordinary data cartridge or trace cartridge were in place. They were, and Reese's heart leapt at the sight of his valuable merchandise. Without any more hesitation, Reese turned his attention back to Jail, who had been able to turn partially around and fired 3 short bursts from his pistol. The first bullet struck Jail in his left shoulder, knocking him backwards and onto Andy's trembling body. The second missed altogether, flying through the space where Jail's chest had been before the first bullet had struck him. The third shot flew past Jail's head, grazing it as it went. Watching as Jail fell, Reese stepped closer to the 2 bodies, edging towards the cell cartridge. Andy watched through only half-aware eyes as Reese reached down for the cartridge, his limbs burning and head heaving. Andy slowly pushed upwards, rolling Jail's unconscious form from his own. The room started to spin upon its axis, and Andy had to fight against the sudden sensation to retch or vomit. Rolling out onto his side, he reached an arm futilely out towards Reese, mouthing something neither of them understood.